Good evening and welcome to the April 4th, 2019 meeting of the Issaquah City Council Land and Shore Committee. My name is Victoria Hunt and I will be the chair, and I'm with Councilmember Stacy Goodman as well as Council President Tola Martz this evening. And we will start with AB 7725, amending IMC 18.06 to prohibit new duplexes or cluster development in single-family suburban SF-S zoning district. And this is a action item for this evening, and this will be presented by Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. So with that, I will hand it over to Kristen.
Hello. So currently, currently duplexes and cluster housing, which allows for duplexes and triplexes, are allowed in the single-family zoning district. And the administration is proposing that these uses no longer be allowed. This does not, as a side note, include accessory dwelling units, which has come up a lot. They can be detached, but that is not included in this proposed amendment. So why are we doing this? One of the reasons is because right now in Sycamore there is talk of putting in sewer down there. And if sewer is put in because it is zoned single-family suburban, duplexes would be allowed, and some people got a little upset by that. Another reason is we have a comprehensive plan policy that says to ensure neighborhood compatibility with infill development and to protect our existing older plats in Issaquah. Third reason is the strategic plan, the growth and development section that came up. There's been talk about also preserving the character or charm of existing neighborhoods. So we sent out letters to all property owners of property zoned single-family suburban, as well as property owners within 300 feet of these. This totaled about 3,100 letters that were sent out. Most of the people were in favor. There were about 6 that were opposed, and then there were several questions about how will this affect any development on my property or surrounding properties. Everything that you see in here that's this yellow goldy color, those are all the single-family suburban properties that would be affected by the proposed amendment. So the proposal includes, it's just with the table of permitted uses, and where it says dwelling single family to attached duplexes, we would take that out and it would just be blank. Same thing with clustering for both 2 acres and 5 acres, it would just be blank, which means it's not allowed there. And then down in the bottom, there's a footnote that goes to these that says duplexes are allowed through cluster housing in single family suburban zones, and that just the single family suburban piece would come out as well.
Sorry,
So,
can I ask a question on that last
Sure.
slide? So can you explain a little bit more about what the cluster means for
Sure.
folks?
Cluster housing is used when you have environmental constraints or critical areas on your property. So say you have a property where with absolutely no constraints you could build 12, you could subdivide it and build 12 lots or 12 units on there. Clustering allows you, if you have environmental constraints, to shift those houses up to smaller lots or duplexes, or in some cases triplexes, so that you can still get potentially those 12 lots in that same area. So according to the King County Assessor data, there are no existing duplexes in any of the single-family suburban properties. There is one cluster development, it's Thompson Townhomes, that was approved back in 1996. This would just make it a legally non-conforming use, which means that any changes that they made on their properties would be restricted. And also no new duplexes, and for some reason I wrote triplexes, which aren't included in this because they're not allowed already, but no new duplexes could be built. That's all I have. If you are so inclined, this would come back to the May 2nd meeting for more discussion, and then to the May 20th council meeting, regular meeting. That's all I have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Council President Martz.
One of the things that I saw in the letters were a couple of folks who had questions around sort of being islands, right? When you showed the map, there are areas that are broadly contiguous. But then like down at the south end of the city, there's a couple of islands, and I think those may have given rise to the they were the only public comment that I wasn't sure I completely understood, at our response. I don't know if I got our response.
Well, some of the, I don't recall the islands, they may have been there, I missed it or forgotten, but some of it, I can't. Work on here? Oh, it does. I think it worked in this view. These are these are protected open spaces, right here. And same along here. You have the Squaw Valley Park and other open spaces, same here. So most of this around here is open space, other community facilities or. Yeah, Kelkari is in here. It's multifamily medium. And then there was some talk about in maybe this area, Mine Hill Road. Across the street from Mine Hill Road is single-family small lot, and just north of that is multifamily, but everything to the south and west of those zones is single-family suburban.
I actually had one of the same questions, so I have it. There was a comment about Newport Way and about that the property would become an island of one single-family structure along Newport Way.
Right.
So it's on page 25.
I looked at that property, if it's the one I'm thinking of, and again, it's been a while. But there was a property that came up, and I talked to somebody who had multifamily around her, and yes, she was a single family. There was a creek, I believe, that divided them, and her property wasn't large enough. You have to have at least 2 acres to do duplexes. Her property wasn't large enough to do a duplex.
Okay, so it wouldn't, so that property wouldn't actually be affected
No.
in terms of the duplex or
Correct.
clustering anyway?
Right, because
Okay.
duplexes can only be done with cluster housing. They can't be standalone.
You have to have 2 acres to do?
2 acres to do cluster housing.
Parcel.
Councilmember Goodman?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I'm just confused. Can you explain the difference between single-family suburban and picking up on some other stuff, like in the housing strategy? But, explain the cluster housing again and how this duplex prohibition fits into that.
Okay, so duplexes are only allowed with cluster housing in single-family suburban. That's the only way that you can do it. You can't just say, I have a parcel and I want to put a duplex there, like you can in single-family duplex area. So it can only be done with cluster housing. And cluster
You have to
housing.
have a 2-acre parcel?
You have to have a 2-acre parcel in order to do cluster housing. Yes,
So if I wanted to put a duplex, I have to, first and foremost, have 2 acres of land,
yes,
because of the single-family suburban zoning, okay?
yes.
So would we still be allowing duplexes in single-family, just regular single-family neighbor zoned?
It's still allowed in single-family suburban, single-family duplex, and single-family estates. And in single-family estates, it's also with cluster housing. The others, you can do it. Suburban, single-family duplex, you can do it outright. Single-family suburban, I'm not sure.
You just said we couldn't.
I mean, single-family small lot. I'm sorry. Yeah. So it is still allowed in other areas.
Okay. I don't know why there's something about it that bothers me, and maybe it's in sync with it yet, that eliminating it broad brush across the city, when we have for example, a housing strategy that says strategy 8 talks about incorporating code provisions to increase the potential diversity of housing types built in the city, and, for example, cottages and duplex units, and it says single-family zoned neighborhoods. So I realize that that's not what we're talking about. But it feels so loud.
It's echoey.
Feels a little bit inconsistent with the struggles that we're having right now, with housing that's more affordable.
Well,
That's my struggle.
Yeah, so I think, and I'm actually looking at the city code. I'm not doing personal things on my phone, just in case you were curious. So, so one of the things about this particular zone, SFS, if you read it, it says, the primary purpose of this district is to provide for single-family neighborhoods in an urban setting while buffering these neighborhoods from commercial services. Permitted uses include detached single-family homes, period. And so I think part of the reason for kind of moving this code revision forward is, is basically, there's a little bit of inconsistency between the allowed uses and what the purpose of this particular zone is, the way that it's described in the municipal code. And so I think we felt like this was more of a cleanup. I think the other issue, and this is connected, I mean, there's housing issues are almost everything we do these days. The issue where we discussed duplexes and triplexes in Central, and one of the things that we have on our work plan to do this year is to do that evaluation and bring that back to council for a conversation. This seems disjointed from that for me, and seems like this is really more to, as Kristen said, shore up that character piece, making sure that certain single-family neighborhoods stay single-family in character as the city continues to grow and densify.
So I get it. I mean, I'm also it's important to me to have a breadth of housing options. One of the things I think about with this, I mean, obviously, Squawk is the biggest chunk of this.
Yeah.
I mean, these are areas that don't have really any services, and so I very much support densifying around the areas where there are transportation and retail and employment opportunities. And I just don't ever, much as I would love to have a little store, where Mountainside and Mount Park intersect, that's never going to happen. And so I feel a little bit more okay around this, just because I really want to see the density happen where where there's already services going in.
So, just to make sure I'm clear, even if, let's say we didn't enact this, how many parcels that are SFS would really even qualify for duplexes? Because you have to have 2 acres.
right. So there weren't that many, I did the count, but I don't remember. There weren't very many individual parcels, probably 7. There were several, though, that could be combined, that were adjacent to each other, where it could happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I understand the concern by one neighborhood, and it seems like one neighborhood's all on board. I'm just not, just seems drastic to me when we've got the potential for densifying is just very extremely low under the SFS if we still allow duplexes. And I'm not, I don't know that I can support that tonight. Just because it just seems like a broad brush tonight when we've got some housing issues.
Okay, but I want to state again that the clustering does not allow increased density, and duplexes don't allow for increased density. It's the character piece, really, that we're looking at. In clustering, you can't do more density than would normally be allowed on a parcel.
So, yeah, I have a question on that. So if you have a parcel that's 3 acres, and you currently have 1 single-family home, and you want to redevelop it currently under the current zone with duplex, then you would have 2 families potentially living where 1 family was living. So that's increasing the density for all intents and purposes, right? I think that's what we're
Right.
grappling with is,
Right. Right, but yeah, exactly, you can have an accessory dwelling unit still,
So what's the
and
difference?
do it that way.
It's
Well,
still two families.
it is two families. You're right.
So I guess what I would, and I'm not saying that I think it's a bad idea. I'm just not, just to say, let's just wipe it all out in everywhere. I mean, that's a lot of yellow up there. And we heard concerns from, one person at the council meeting that it didn't seem appropriate for that neighborhood. And so I'm just concerned that there are other areas that, it might be appropriate to have a duplex, all things considered. So that's my concern.
Okay.
I have a question. I saw in one of the comments that there was a question about, are there more areas in Issaquah to be considered for single-family SFS in the future? And then in the response it said, single-family estates is also being considered, but is following a different track. My question was, what's that track and what's happening in the plan
It's
for
been
single-family
discussed,
estates?
it's been discussed with some single-family estate property owners. I don't know where that went, it just happened. I haven't found out yet, but it's being discussed, yeah.
And are those, or is that discussion similar in terms of limiting or keeping the character?
It is
similar to
exactly
where
the
it
same.
is? Okay. And why is it on a different track?
Part of it is because the vision for single-family estates says that where it ended with a period, single-family period, in single-family estates, it says single-family detached housing and duplexes, period. So the vision there currently allows for duplexes.
It's more overt
And
about
it is.
So it's sort of a bigger change from the
It is.
existing
So.
code?
Mhm.
Okay.
So this went to PPC.
Yes.
These questions around housing availability and density, did those come up? Did PPC sort of wade into that?
Housing availability, no. The density was a concern among residents. Well, one in particular that asked again about it. But for most people, it wasn't a huge issue. No, it wasn't an issue.
You, of the people that wrote letters, it does seem like there's a number of people that either attended the various meetings or wrote letters. And then there's also only 7 parcels that would be affected by because
Seven
of their
individual
size.
seven individual parcels as they stand now, but if they combine, there would be more.
So any parcels, if they combined enough parcels to be more than 2 acres, would currently
Right.
apply.
Right. And
Okay.
that's off the top of my head. That was a few months ago, so.
Well, do we have any other questions? Okay. So I had a sort of similar response to Councilmember Goodman, especially just with the
Are we
one
moving
range.
to deliberation? Because
Well,
we have public, I just wondered if we want,
okay, yeah, I guess it's kind of just one more question, but I'll phrase it as a question. So I had a similar question, or similar issue about maybe different areas of this are more appropriate or less appropriate for this particular change. We do have some areas here that have apartments and some areas one area that has the cluster development. So how were the boundaries of the zone originally decided, and is there even options for doing a change to the boundaries based on what development is currently there, or something along those lines?
Well, you can't, so are you talking rezones? Are you talking, you can't really take out individual parcels from this proposal.
Right.
And if you take it out from SFS and you want to change some of that, you'd have to do rezones, which you typically don't do standalone rezones.
Yeah, I wasn't asking about particular parcels, I guess, but more just that there's some suggestion from some of the notes that different parts of the neighborhoods are different in character at the current time.
Right, so you're thinking Mine Hill, where to the north, there's multifamily medium, and across the street, there's single-family suburban?
That's
Yeah.
one of the areas that's in the comments
Okay.
about being near higher density and,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. And then, one more question. Is there a process for if a homeowner, so if the zoning changed, you could still combine parcels though, but you would not be able to put a
Right,
duplex
you
on
can't,
it?
you can't do cluster housing then. You could still subdivide and do individual standalone, single-family lots. So it doesn't eliminate development. It just changes, it just doesn't allow for, duplex next to duplex next to duplex next to duplex.
And it still allows the combination of lots potentially.
Right.
But just not
The
the cluster
subdivision
dwelling.
combination, yeah, and then potentially subdivision of lots.
Okay. All right. Do we have any more questions?
I do. So I thought I understood it, and then I read one of the comments in here, and what you just said dovetailed that I didn't really understand it.
Okay.
So I have on my property 70,000 square feet of property.
Okay.
So, and most of mine is actually critical slope, so I can't do anything with it anyhow. But if it wasn't critical slope, I could subdivide it and sell, and that's not gonna change at all with this?
Right. If it's the flat, unencumbered parcel, you've got 70,000 square feet, that could be divided into, the minimum lot size is 9,600 square feet. You could subdivide that property into lots that are 9,600 square feet
So
and
now
still
I
build
don't-
single-family houses.
Now I don't understand if we're really accomplishing, I thought I understood the intent of this bill and why it did what we thought it was gonna do, but now if people can go subdivide lots and build more houses on their lots, we get one little particular kind, we would close the door on one particular kind of increased footprints of structures, however we wanna call it, if we don't wanna call it density. But if people can still subdivide their lots, and I don't know if we're really accomplishing anything close to what I thought the intent and what this bill would accomplish. Keith, can you?
It's
help me
not
understand?
so don't think about it as a quantity issue, it's a character issue. So there is a perspective from some that a duplex and a single-family detached home are not compatible. That if somebody built a duplex next to you, that's different than you subdividing your property and having 4 houses that look like yours, that are all detached and have yards all the way around them. Duplex have a shared wall, right?
Right.
And so the idea here, and again, I'm not saying I have a particular position on this. The idea here is that enough duplexes in an established single-family detached neighborhood would potentially affect the character of that and the perception of the neighborhood as it relates to those new units. So the minimum lot sizes are not changing. All that would change is you can't do an attached structure within that zone.
So, under Tola's hypothetical,
Yeah,
let's just say he's on Squawk and he has 70,000 square feet, and let's just say he has a flat lot.
yeah.
Is he, no matter how many times he subdivides it, is he still SFS and he's still?
Yeah.
As long as it's
he stays-
9,600
so
square
he could-
feet.
So under
Yeah.
that scenario, that's good, 70,090, whatever, 100 square feet is, let's call it 10,000 square feet. So he creates 7 10,000 square foot lots. He could do that. He could then build another 6 homes on his existing lot, and that's all allowed within the zone. None of those homes could be a shared wall duplex.
They're
They
not
all
big
have to have side yards, front yards, backyards.
But you could have more.
And each of
single-family
those
homes
7
duplex.
could have an accessory dwelling unit. So you could have 14
Yeah.
families on that property.
Great. Any more questions? And so we will take public comment. Is there any members of the public that would like to speak on this? Please come to the microphone. If you could give your name and if you choose to give your relationship to the city, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Thanks.
Sure. I'm Alan Flintoff. My family, we own some property, 2.5 acres, 4445 East Lakes Mamish Parkway Southeast. We're one of your 7. And we just have a concern about not being able to utilize our property if we so choose to have duplexes on that property. We certainly understand Sycamore and their concerns there, and we certainly support them. But I think that character is more an issue of design than zoning. There are some cute duplexes right over on Andrews, and I think that those could be beautiful wherever they're at, including up on Squawk Mountain or what have you. I'd also say it is certainly much better than Atlas on Gilman Boulevard. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak?
David Kapler, this is dangerous coming in and missing most of what you talked about already. But it's the concept is great. I was reading through all the comment letters that you got and all of that. I was wondering if the actual zoning is the correct zoning on some of those parcels. Rather than, I believe what you're doing is right for that particular zone, but in some cases, given the proximity to multifamily and some of those things, perhaps some of those zonings need to be looked at, not this particular motion.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So we've been dealing with a house being built right next door to my mother's 1956 mid-century modern home in Bellevue. And they maximized the ability to build on the lot and the height. And so she has this looming thing over an entire neighborhood of little mid-century modern things. So when you talk about changes in neighborhood character, it's heartbreaking to have something that does not fit into a neighborhood be built next to you, across the street from you, or have it totally erode a neighborhood. So if this seems to me like just almost a temporary clarification of an area before we have a community conversation about what we want our neighborhoods to be and look like and what character we want them to retain. And so if I thought this was a big change, I would say, but this is just a minor clarification. If you look at your strategic plan, you actually look like you're going to be going out and having neighborhood conversations to see what they want their character to be in those areas. So for housekeeping, I would just pass this through and expect and demand within the next 2 years that we go area by area and clarify the language of what those exact places should look like for a given period of time. It won't be forever because time changes too fast. But this doesn't seem like big enough to spend much time on. The next step, which is what I'm assuming is happening from what I'm seeing, is way more important. And you're looking at me blankly like I'm, okay, your strategic plan has that as a near-term, within 5-year action. So City of Bellevue is doing it as we speak, going neighborhood by neighborhood because they realize their affordable housing is being lost and their neighborhood character is eroding while they have a housing shortage. So it's a crisis to them. You guys have named it as a crisis, so perhaps I'm being presumptive and I should be standing here saying you all need to be doing that.
Thank you. Okay. All right, deliberations. Would anybody like to start?
I don't know that my needle moved any. I I appreciate looking towards our not yet adopted strategic plan for what we might do over the next 5 years, and that's exactly what it will be, what we might do over the next 5 years. Certainly won't be able to do everything that's in that plan. There's going to be 40-some things or something like that. And I think that the past is any indication, even if we were to go to neighborhood by neighborhood in the next 2 to 5 years, it would be years and years and years before we changed anything in the code to reflect that. I don't know that I can support any more than Sycamore tonight, but if I don't, I'll think long and hard about it before the council meeting and may change my mind.
Thank you. I have a question though, because Sycamore is part of this zone, so that would require a rezone if we want to do a change specific to one part of the one neighborhood. Is that right? You can't have a zone that
You can't
has
just say
different.
only half the zone has to do this and not the other half. Unless you have, you can't do that.
Okay,
Well, then you can't be a rezone.
Yeah. I mean, so we'd have to go back to PPC.
Yeah.
Because what you guys are talking about is not, it's not undoable. It's going back to PPC and having a different conversation than what we've had.
Okay.
We weren't talking about rezoning, we were talking about changing the allowed
Use.
land
Right,
uses.
yeah,
Right? And so if the direction from the council comes back that this is more complicated than what was served up, and we want you guys to do something that's a little bit more scalpel-like and less machete-like, then we would come up with how best to do that. And it would be helpful if the council's direction was clear that, you know, Sycamore is a different thing than the rest of the SFS zones, so that we know we would see how we would target a zone change for just Sycamore.
Thanks. Council President Moritz?
So I fear I've done 180 in the last 2 hours. I came in thinking, well, PPC voted 4 to no, not. Public seems to support it. Thought I understood. I keep saying up on the dais that we're so lucky because we have all of our growth in the valley, because I've seen growth, you know, really enrage a lot of, you know, I have friends in Shoreline and talk to them about growth, and oh my God, lost an entire evening. So this doesn't do what I thought it did, right? To go back to my property, assuming it was flat,
Yeah.
I actually think if you said to my neighbor, would you rather see a duplex on this property or 7 individual houses, I suspect I'd actually rather see the duplex, although I don't know that for a fact. So it's just, the point is, it seems a little bit weird and a little bit arbitrary to just pick this and not deal with the fundamental question of the fact that, you know, I come back to what I said earlier about, you know, I thought this was here, part of why I was excited about this was it was, you know, that it thought it would staunch development in areas where we don't have infrastructure, and it wouldn't do that. So I think I'm not ready to support this evening.
This is not intended to help focus our growth on the valley floor.
Right.
This is not
That's
that.
yes, and thus, the question about character, I don't think, I'm not ready to say that a duplex ruins a neighborhood's character.
I agree with that. That was going to be a follow-up comment. My neighborhood has, of course, it's denser than yours, but I would think there's duplexes in most neighborhoods. Is there no duplex
There
on
are no
Squat?
duplexes in single-family suburban or single-family estates right now.
Well,
They
so there
didn't-
are no duplexes, but I
Not
mean,
yet.
there are apartment or condo buildings.
There are 2 condo buildings, Spyglass and one other, and those are currently legally non-conforming. They were built a long time ago when it was allowed by right. And then the Thompson Townhomes or cluster housing permitted in 96.
You haven't ruined the character.
So I think in my understanding of this, it doesn't affect very many parcels as they are currently at the current size of those parcels, because there just aren't that many that this would affect currently. You'd have to actually make changes to where the lot lines are to be in effect for most, and there are some exceptions, but, I mean, how many parcels are in this area versus the 7 that are currently
About 900?
900, so, it's not going to affect very many
Oh,
parcels.
wait, I'm sorry. No, wait, we sent out 3,000? I was thinking we sent out 1,000, so, yeah, more. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah, 2,700.
Many parcels that are not able to be duplexes anyway. So I also think if you had a very large lot and you wanted to have 2 families live on the lot, it's probably, assuming you have utilities and services to that area, it's probably a more efficient housing type to have a duplex versus to build 2 separate structures, to divide it in 2 and build 2 separate structures. It's my understanding of how duplexes are constructed. So I'm not seeing a lot of the rationale for why we would make a change again for city duplexes.
Can I ask a question? So, what are the so I think there's, I'm gonna guess there's unanimity for one neighborhood that's concerned. What are the options for focusing on that?
So if the committee had a majority opinion on that, to come up with an alternative that would maybe be a more specific target to Sycamore, I think you could remand this back to PPC, at where the administration would work with PPC to come up with a different recommendation back for council. It could very well be we have to renotice, so this might not happen in the next, month. But that, you could do that. You could remand it back.
After it
Because
goes
right
to
now
full
you've got to, so right now you have, you'd have to,
It's
your
got to go to council.
motion would be to send it back to PPC, and if the full council bought into that. Because right now you're really working off the Planning Policy Commission's recommendation for approval, right? And so you could say, okay, we've thought about that. Here's our concerns. We want it to go back to PPC to address both concerns of growth management and character, and whether or not Sycamore has a different risk factor potentially than maybe some of the other neighborhoods that are shown on the map. I don't know.
Or
I
how
just
we
made
could
all that up.
Or how you can just focus on Sycamore and affect some sort of code change that would prohibit.
So, it seems to me that one element of why this is not, I think, going to affect the neighborhood character is because of this lot splitting potential. So the minimum lot size, that's unique to the zone?
Every zone has a minimum lot size, except for Central.
Well, no, yeah, once you get into mixed use and
Yeah.
just the I think just the single-family neighborhoods have minimum lot sizes.
Was that considered as a potential mechanism for keeping the neighborhood character, looking at the lot size for that neighborhood? Because the minimum lot size being so small and allowing that many houses on
Well,
one
you can't,
parcel seems
yeah, but you
to
can't put a duplex on 9,600 square feet.
Right, only on
Right.
2 acres,
Right,
right?
right,
Currently,
okay.
yeah. But you could put a bunch of houses, well, a bunch of single-family houses. I mean, to me, that seems like that has a big effect on the character of the neighborhood.
I would agree. Yeah, because like I said, the example of my property, I'm pretty sure my neighbor would be unexcited if I
Yeah.
said, hey, we're gonna have 7 houses on my property where there was 1. Be like, oh, yeah, no. Right, so it has a significant impact, right. That's you're right, a duplex, or in the case of 2 acres, 8 houses, right? Because it's about 80,000 acres for 2 acres, or 80,000 square feet for 2 acres.
So just not proposing solutions tonight, but if you remember what we did with the replacement regulations for Highlands and Talus, we basically said, you can have one lot, you can have one house on each lot regardless of size. I mean, and we did it that way for those because of the varied sizes of existing lots. It was an easier way than to try and figure out what that range was. You could do something similar in Sycamore where you could, if that is indeed what the intended outcome is, you know, you could basically say you can have one house per lot. And the lots, the minimum lot sizes is prescribed by code. Right now is 9,400 square feet, whatever that number is. So, I mean, so we can, if that is, I mean, it would be helpful for the administration if we know what the goal is. If the goal
You could
is,
still divide your lot, right? I mean, under that scenario, you could still, if you had a big lot, you could still divide your lot, and then you could still put
if you
multiple
leave,
houses in
if
the
you
lot.
leave the density alone, yes. The density then equates to a minimum lot size.
How many of the 7 properties are in Sycamore?
I don't know.
More than 0, I'm assuming.
Yes, most of them.
Most of them.
Pardon me? I don't remember, but the majority of them are.
Okay.
And the same place where the lots could be combined are there.
So back to the question at hand. One thing is you guys could take it out of committee, recommend it go back to PPC for more work. You could ask it to come back to this committee for another conversation where we might have some different ideas that we could pitch around, where you guys could then evolve your thinking on what might be a preferred outcome. Or you can just send it forward as denial. And then it just, if your peers agree, then it just goes away.
Well, so my preference on those 3 would be to go with the middle option, the one where we take another look at it with some more options, because I think that this did generate a lot of public feedback, and there was a lot of support for, I think, the intent. And so I would be interested in making sure that the code achieves that intent, but I think the intent is the right intent. So I would like to look at it more rather than just deny it. And I appreciate the work that went into this by PPC, but I think we as council probably can take a look at some other options and take it from here. So Councilmember Goodman, do you have thoughts on the options?
I wonder how many public comments did we get?
47.
And how many do we have any, just by the names, do we have any idea how much of that came from Sycamore?
No, I don't.
Okay. So I think that original intent was to address issues that Sycamore residents raised, and then we just decided to apply it citywide. I'm still interested in how we solve a problem for Sycamore. So I would be interested if it comes back to this committee, knowing how we can do that. And I realize depending on what option the council ultimately decides, it might have to go back to PPC. I get that. And I want anybody from, sorry, Tola, people from Sycamore who are watching or hearing about this, I want them to know that I clearly hear them, but I'm just not understanding the broad brush for the whole city.
Mr. President Martz?
Yeah, even further, I would love to know if this comes back with proposed solutions. I would love to know from the folks in Sycamore, this whole issue of duplexes, in the hypothetical 2-acre parcel, is it that they don't want to see duplexes? Is if the choice is a duplex versus 7 additional single-family homes, is the second option just fine? I mean, understanding what the concern is amongst the Sycamore residents a little bit more clearly, I think would be helpful if and when this comes back to us.
I think that's a good point, and maybe the concern was duplexes and the carving off small, subdividing wasn't considered an option. And maybe there's not a lot of that up there because of the topography and the creek, but anyway.
Okay. So currently, the the motion, which we are not going to proceed with this evening, is to refer this back to council. So I think it does probably have to go back to council to be referred back to our committee?
No,
Or can we
no.
directly
I think the
refer?
bill assumed we were going to stay here twice.
Oh,
Right.
I think we can do that if you guys want to do that
Right.
without
Okay.
messing with the bill.
Okay. So I just won't make the motion then. Okay.
So it would be great if you all think that this should come back next month. We'll do some homework.
Okay.
We'll continue this conversation in May.
Great.
Okay.
I really think it should come back to May because I'll be on vacation on Orcas Island.
Okay, then.
I'm sorry, I won't be here, but I do have a son.
You could call in.
I could.
We can Skype you in.
I'll check with Tracy on that.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. So I'll proceed without, we won't take action on that item tonight, but thank you for the presentation. The next item on our agenda is AV 7683, Amendments to Issaquah Municipal Code Compact Public Buildings. It's presented by Trish Hainanen. Thank you.
Here we are again. When we came before you last month in March, you had asked us to clarify this lovely table that you see here now. I think it looks a lot better. You wanted us to clarify the minimum FAR and maximum FAR, and also the height for, the maximum height for public schools and for public buildings. And so what we brought you here today is showing that the minimum FAR stayed at .75 for both, and the maximum FAR stayed at 2.0 for schools, but it went up to 5.0 for public buildings, and that was the discussion about a city hall could be bigger, it could have mixed use with it, it's probably in a more dense area, and to be in central, since that's the highest FAR in central, that made a lot of sense to us. The height, though, we changed the height to make it, the central height would be 85 feet for public buildings, but if it wasn't in central, it stayed with the 65, so it would be compatible with the other zones. Whereas public schools is existing 65 feet, we left that alone for the height to be 65 feet. From your packet, we tried to make the footnotes be more connected with the table so they wouldn't be confusing. Those are the main changes that you asked us to bring back, is to figure out FAR and the height, and so those are the changes that we did. Are there questions on how we approached it?
I do have a question. I am still unclear on why there is a max floor area ratio at all. Why there's a cap?
I guess certainty, not that they would ever hit it, they may hit it, and as we go, as we get more urban and maybe 2 is easier to hit for schools, then we could review and see if there's another threshold, but I think we're trying to be consistent with the other codes that we have by putting a cap on there, because there's a cap in central. So we're being consistent.
It's a bulk and height fit with non-public facilities. So to not have any maximum FAR or maximum height on public facilities, you could potentially get out of character with the rest of the buildings that are going in central. So from our perspective, as Trish said, we mimicked maxing the maxes that were allowed for a private building within central, and that's why those numbers are there. It just seemed like we needed to have standards for public facilities as well.
Okay.
Or else you could get an 8-story water treatment plant somewhere, and that could be bad. Duplex. That's okay.
That's quite
Well,
complex.
and the stories and there are other things that also regulate trying to make it more compact and more higher FAR,
Right.
it seems like.
And these are a huge leap for us. I mean, 85 feet's a 7-story building right now. I mean, other than Timber Ridge, and Homewood Suites, we haven't hit that yet. So these, getting to this place will be definitely, I think, a big densification from where we are today. 20 years from now, these standards may look really suburban, and we might be, or our successors might be doing much different things than this. But for us, this would take us a long ways, I think, in terms of densifying.
Okay. And I did have a question also about, and this is based on comments I received, but the mitigation, environmental mitigation, is the environmental mitigation for these reviews the same as with all other permit review processes?
Yes. Both of these types of buildings would go through a level 3 review, which is a public hearing in front of the Development Commission. And those would require some kind of environmental SEPA review that would happen. There is a section, I reread it again today, there's a section in the code that exists today that says if you're putting if you're putting a major or minor utility in a community facility open space area, you need to do an alternative analysis to make sure that that's truly the place that that utility facility should go, is in the community facility open space. And in that section, it talks about the analysis needs to list mitigations for the alternatives to see if maybe that's not really the best place for that utility to go. So there may have been some confusion because it talks about mitigation, as well as the SEPA review for that facility would also talk about mitigation. But that's a special situation that we put additional criteria in if someone's trying to put a utility in an open space place, that we're requiring them to do some comparison analysis for us.
But other than that, the mitigation
Other than
would
that,
be
these
same
two
permitting
uses would
process.
need SEPA review and mitigation, just like we do in any other kind of a building.
Okay, thank you. There was previously a column for pervious, and I think there is in the packet. So in the table, there will be that pervious column, or we're not doing that anymore?
We just put the 90% because this mimics the table in the central standards. So it's a lot cleaner looking because it doesn't have minimum lot size and all those things that seem to just make it confusing, because these wouldn't have those kinds of restrictions.
Okay.
So that's why the pervious surface came out.
Okay.
Plus, as we overhaul Title 18, so right now you've got the IMC code is in one set of tables and central is in a different set of tables, and they don't necessarily match. As we go through an overhaul and bring it all together, part of why we started to put the tables in similar format is we think we're going to try to make the whole code look like it is in a similar format and not multiple formats. So I think that's one of the reasons why we did it the way we did right now, anticipating that's where we're headed with Title 18.
Okay. And is the 90% impervious, is that throughout, or is that specific to public buildings? That's not for other buildings outside Central?
Right, there's other zones in Central that do 90%, which is a stormwater criteria. They still have to meet the tree retention and tree cover requirements. This is only talks about, this is the stormwater item.
Okay. And that was my last question about the tree retention. Is that the same with this?
Right, these, even if they're not in Central, they have to meet the Central standards for landscaping, and it's Chapter 10 landscaping, and then it calls out specifically not only that chapter, but the landscaping and structured parking landscaping that goes around structured parking.
And
This
tree
section.
retention.
And tree retention, it calls it out in this section. Existingly, it calls it out.
Okay. Great, thank you. It for my questions. Okay, are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this item?
All right, so every time I look at this, it makes me a little crazy. And I go to Providence Heights, and I say, are we saying that Providence Heights, with their massive parcel, is supposed to have a maximum 90% impervious surface with the ability to have their tree retention waived and put their money put into the tree fund? Because they could build their building and then they could say, wow, we need a lot of play fields. In order to, it wouldn't be the building, but we would be, we have to have football at the high school, or we have to have a soccer field at the middle school. So I don't agree that if you have a big, huge lot, that this should be the standard that you would use. And I don't think that should be true for the city or public buildings or the school district. The city has a lot of land, and I think the intent is to try to efficiently put the small footprint of building on the land and try to preserve other things around it so your buildings go up and you have other uses that you can use your land for. I don't know that that is getting to my goal. I don't even know that that's your goal. So then I go, well, what is, again, the intent of doing this? And what's the problem we're trying to solve? Is this solving that problem? And I guess I don't know. My problem is I want to keep the trees where I can, and I want our town to look green and pretty, and we have a tree code that allows us to kill all the trees and put money into a fund. And so it's not working for me. That's my problem. I don't know if these people who've been working with it can explain that better to make me think, wow, that is the big problem, and this is the solution, because that's the level I feel like I'm at right now.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public? No?
Just going across the alley here, it's a single family, but you can have a duplex on it. Can you put a 65-foot building right up against a residential structure like that? Or now it's a single family home, and it seems like, how much can the city do right up against the existing residential areas?
Thank you. Well,
single-family parks, houses, are they exempted in some way because their building value is low? It wouldn't be very hard to get over their threshold and make them do this. So I'm going Confluence Park, we have Eck House, it's falling apart, it's gonna need a $150,000 redo. Now what do we do?
thank you. Oh, okay. So I guess that those raised a few more questions, if it would be possible to ask. But so against residential, there's a question about building conformity or having buildings fit nicely into the neighborhood. I mean, I know that there's some code, or there's some wording around that idea of fitting into the neighborhood feel, especially around the schools. I know there was a lot of code added about that, so I wonder if you could speak to that concern.
Right. As far as one of the issues that this was trying to fix was originally community facility properties had to meet the zoning of the most constrained adjacent zone. And so we learned with the school district when they were looking at the Hilltop, whatever that's called now, by Swedish that they wouldn't be able to make an efficient school if they had to meet single-family zoning or the open space that was next to it. So we wanted to have different regulations for schools so they didn't have to meet the most constricted zoning next door. So then we did the same thing when we realized that we wouldn't be able to do a fire station, let's say, or a city hall in some of the places where we were thinking of getting land, because next to it would have been a zone that would have been so restrictive that we would have had to do a one-story, not very efficient building. And so that's what this would change, is to allow us to have this kind of density and height in those areas. The compatibility with whatever neighborhood you're in, we would do that. That would be on a site-by-site basis. I think there's something about that you can request adjustments if you need them. For the build-to line, we talked about if there's plazas in front or if there's something that you're trying to buffer. Also, the school district wanted that line for safety, for kids' safety and drop-off places. But I think you could do a taller building next to single-family. It would depend on the site. Obviously, right here, it's pretty skinny. So it would be hard to, I think, to go up that high and still be efficient and get the parking and everything that you would need. But it could be possible if we could fit the box in, but I don't think we could on a little parcel. The trees, Central allows that you have to do tree retention and your whole landscaping, and you can have a discount in it, and I don't know, I'm not a current planner, so I don't know exactly how it all works when the permits come through. I don't know if Keith knows more about that.
So,
Because you delve into that more than.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
If there's issues with the tree code, that's tree code
different,
and
yeah.
not this code in front of us.
Yeah,
I think part of, and I also want to take issue with something Connie said, we don't have a lot of property. Most of the property that we own, that the city owns, was purchased for stormwater flooding remediation or open space acquisition for things like Bergsma and adjacent to the creek, which aren't going to get any development ever. So the stuff that we actually have that we can put buildings on is pretty small. This is really with the understanding that we will need, as we grow as a community, we're going to need to build new facilities. If we want to build a new fire station, this is all about putting us on a smaller parcel. The same conversation we have with the school district is land is so expensive. If we can make smaller footprints for our new facilities, that's good for the community. And so that's really what this is aimed at.
Councilmember Goodman.
What about the specific scenario that they talked about?
Which one?
Well, she only talked about one property, the Providence Heights, and how big it is, and you can go 90%. Allows it to go 90%.
So just because the maximum impervious is 90% doesn't mean they're going to pave 90% of the property. What it means, because for every square foot that they pave, they have to provide stormwater detention and facilities and treatment for that. So there's no incentive for them to pave and have hard surfaces any more than they have to. So assuming they buy Providence Heights, which they have not, they will come up with a site plan for that property, which will need to meet all codes: tree retention, landscaping, everything. Now, like I said, if we have issues with those codes, then let's deal with those codes. But and I believe those standards, we're not proposing changes to that first line, are we, Trish? I lost track of this. It's been here.
No, that's
in code now. So all we're really talking about is the public facilities, the public buildings line. So if we have issues on the top line, that's a different conversation too, as much as tree canopy is.
And I did, though, have a question, and it's about this max FAR again. So Talus, the parcel on Talus, that'll be a more compact school than a lot of the schools that we've seen in our area.
It's 5 stories.
Do we have a sense of what the FAR is for the five-story school?
I don't know that number. They're gonna have to meet, so,
Well, they've got a max of 2, so I'm
right.
wondering about.
So they're gonna have to meet code. And as far as I know, in talking with the planner who's doing, that plan review, we think that they're gonna meet the FAR requirements.
So it's somewhere between 0.75 and 2.
Yeah,
Okay, with a five-story
I think
building.
it's closer to 0.75. I think.
Okay. All right.
Because that's it's a pretty big piece of property. I mean, it's just all unfortunately sloping down the hill.
Do we have any deliberation or thoughts on this item? Okay. Council President Martz?
No, I was just going to say, we have talked it through in the past. I am in favor of seeing denser, both city facilities and school district facilities, and anything that we can do to help promote that, I'm in favor of. I mean, not anything, but I'm in favor of this.
I agree. I think the intent is to have these more compact buildings, and I think we will see when new schools and new public buildings come in, how well it works, and maybe we'll have a chance to revisit, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. And do you have anything to add? Okay, so with that, I will make a motion. So I'd move to adopt proposed ordinance, to recommend to full council that we adopt proposed ordinance amending IMC 18.07.480 community facility standards to allow for more efficient and sustainable development standards for public buildings as the city continues to densify. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 All right,
Those
my mic was
opposed?
off. I was an aye.
Okay, all those opposed? So that passes unanimously, and I believe this will be referred back to council at our next meeting, April 15th.
Consent agenda?
Yeah.
And I believe this can be on consent agenda. Do we agree?
I'm good with that.
Okay, consent.
This for your update?
Yes.
Okay,
Do I
thank
click on it?
you. And so then the last item on our agenda this evening is project updates, and this will be presented by Keith Niven.
With help. So the first thing I wanted to give you guys an update on, and this was actually a request from the committee chair, is a conversation about river and streams. And Jeff Wood, who is the chair, is here, and I'd like to invite Jeff. Where do I go? You could sit. You sit next to Vicky. Just you're gonna need to turn your mic on.
Button has the power on it.
Yeah. You're a smart guy.
You know I try.
So I thought we'd just talk about, we had a meeting, was that last week?
Just you and I?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
The board.
The board last week, yes.
Okay, so
Correct.
wow, time. I think you can maybe mention what was on the agenda, and then we can talk about what we see coming up, and then the committee might have some questions.
So is that what you guys would like? I mean, so basically, you know, we haven't met for a long time because there hasn't been a lot of things to come in front of what our scope and sequence is for what we look at. Last week, we talked about the stormwater update, rivers and, the shoreline plan. We also looked at the new plans for the Ford dealership over, I thought they were dog pens, but they're pig pens? They're pig.
No, they're dog.
Oh, they were, I thought they were
Yeah.
pig. They were, anyway, dog pens in that piece of property over there. Had a discussion about those.
Across the kennels.
Do you know the kennels? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so.
No, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking
They're over by Lakeside.
So when you go underneath the freeway on the right, going over towards Fred Meyer from here, there's the buildings that look like pens.
sinking?
They're sinking and they're all wooden.
Oh, that are not occupied. that
There's
are
nothing there.
derelict.
Historic.
Yes, yes.
Historic kennels.
Yes,
Ah,
yes.
okay, now-
Okay,
I'm
and
with
that's
you.
where the Ford
I'm sorry.
dealership, they're looking to move there. So we looked at some of the issues regarding mitigation and code around the North Fork, and that's a really important, river stream as far as salmon and stuff are concerned. So we had some real concerns about that development, which was informative. It was good to meet again. And so that's kind of what we do, and then we also had a conversation about what does the Rivers and Streams Commission Board do? What does that look like? You know, we don't meet very often. I think that's frustrating to a lot of us because we feel like we want to play a role in government, not government, but in our city and the environment and the rivers and streams, and we're on there because it matters to us. But I've been on it 10 years, and I don't think we've really, in the last 5 or 6 years, really understood our direction and what that it needs to be, and what maybe council wants that to be.
So the next step, and let's pass this out, we handed this out at the board meeting.
I've looked at it a lot, so.
First column is city code. So that's what it says, the duties and responsibilities of River and Streams is supposed to cover. Some of those are pretty clear for me personally, and some of them are fairly vague. And so part of what we have taken on as a work product for the next River and Streams meeting is to actually try and fill out this chart. So to basically take those identified duties and responsibilities and start to identify what would be specific work items that would come out of those that the board would expect or would want to participate in. And so I think what we're looking at is potentially kind of filling out this table, you know, getting to a point where it makes sense for us, and then sharing it and getting some feedback on does this make sense for the administration, for the council? Does it potentially lead to any code changes in column 1? I mean, you know, that could potentially be that kind of circle back to, you know, maybe there's something that comes out of this conversation, but it's not clearly identified as something that's in code. Well, let's bring a code, or see if there's support for a code amendment to add it, if that's what comes out of this. So this is what I think we see doing, you know, into May. Evergreen Ford's going to come back with a more specific plan for how it interfaces with the North Fork. That commitment was made as well. And then we've also talked about probably more like June, July, is taking a field trip and looking at some of the wetland mitigation sites to see, one, how are they doing, and were they planted the way that maybe they were presented to River and Streams, so they can see, okay, this is what's actually happened after it bypassed the board or went past the board. And then we can have a conversation about, you know, what do they see, and are things turning out the way that maybe they were presented at the board meeting? And so that'll be something we probably do maybe midsummer. So that's probably about as far as my head has gotten around this.
Yeah, and I think the field trip, you know, one of the concerns is, you know, we'll make a recommendation, but what does that mean when we make a recommendation? Who listens to it? You know, it's supposed to go to the council, but does it really have an impact? When we make a recommendation, how is that integrated into what we're seeing? You know, I drive by I don't even remember the name of the apartment place that's next to the Sammamish Court Club.
Anthology.
Anthology. And I'm looking at that going, every time I drive by, that doesn't look like I think we thought that was supposed to look like with all the mitigation and things like that. And so, you know, I think in the sense of, do we have a purpose? And, you know, we talk about the growth of Issaquah. Is there room for us to grow as well as a board and take on some different responsibilities, new responsibilities, and have an impact and have a public say is one of the things we've talked about, kind of the first look at projects as a public representative. So I think the chart, the field trips, kind of getting that idea, maybe me walking across the alley and coming into some of the council meetings to, you know, you made the comment about the 6 foot, and I'm like, 6 stories next to my house, holy cow. But yeah, that might be something that we can do if they have some of those on the agenda. You and I can talk about those, so we can report back. So that's all I got.
Great, well, thank you so much for coming, and as Keith mentioned, this was something that I really wanted to bring forward because I know that, I think that the responsibilities of this board are so important to the city, and we're working right now on our strategic plan, and one of the things that's, I think, coming out of that strategic plan is that there is this emphasis on making sure that as we grow, our natural resources are stewarded are responsibly, and that we are protecting our natural environment for the current and future generations. So I think that there are specifics in here, and then there's also this sort of broad direction. I think it leaves that room to grow for the board, and I also think it's a super important element that doesn't have another board in the city that currently represents it. So so when you were talking about how does that feed into our work, I think there's not a board that currently feeds into that, and that is really, I think, an important thing that we could benefit from. So I was really glad to meet you and to hear from you at this meeting, and looking forward to hearing more about how the board can work with the different departments to expand or to work on different things in the scope of the board. And I know also there are many departments that have different elements of different projects that are important to water quality, to conservation, to the environment, habitat for fish, birds, and mammals, and all the other things that are in the responsibilities of this board.
Do you mind if I add one more thing real quick?
No, absolutely.
You know, you talked about, we did get a presentation on the strategic plan, and a couple of areas that I thought, hey, this board could really be part of it at is obviously environmental concerns and things like that. I thought, you know, if we really do, and we could have a really solid role in this overall strategic planning, which, you know, as a resident, I was pretty happy to see, but also as a board member, that there were some opportunities there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once we have the strategic plan, then we have to actually follow through, and so then there'll be a whole bunch of discussions about about the actions and what we have to take to follow through.
Well, I'm delighted that you came tonight. Nice to meet you, and thank you for serving on the board. The board, this particular board, used to be years ago very, very active.
Yeah.
And met often. And so I'm interested to see what comes out of these exercises, because I'm very anxious and excited for the board to become active again.
I think we would all like to see that. So, very much so. Thank you for giving me some time to chat. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, for coming. So the other project update for you guys is Title 18. So we are knee-deep in Title 18 update. It's taking, so staff's spending a bunch of time with that. We pretty much lost February to snow, and it sounds dramatic, but we really did. We tried to get meetings with our consultants, and they just all happened to be on snow events. It just was amazing. So we are about a month behind where we thought we would be at this point. I still think originally their proposal was to get us a draft code for Title 18 update and incorporate obviously the new code for the green necklace by January. So we're probably looking at February would be my guess at this point, but it is moving forward. The green necklace part is going to start earnestly, I think, in maybe 2 weeks, because next week is spring break for some of us who still have school-age kids. So I think, so all of that seems good. It seems like it's, we're basically going through the existing Title 18 now and just cleaning up redundancies and things that maybe we aren't doing as much as the code says we should be doing because they're just not relevant anymore. And so part of it is just redlining the heck out of the existing IMC. And we're doing a lot of work, staff is doing a lot of work because we have those insights that the consultants don't have. And then we're handing all that stuff to them and talking about kind of ways to more clearly present our code. Because our code is, sorry Trish, our code's hard to read. Sorry. So anyway, I think it's moving in a good direction.
Thanks. So This is an item on our agenda. Do you have any questions or, okay. So this is an item on the agenda, so I will ask if there are any members of the public that would like to speak on the project updates. Item on the agenda, so if you would like to.
So there have been a million things the River and Streams Board could have had and didn't. So woo-hoo, yes, reinvigorate the River and Streams Board because our town has a cornerstone in the environment that we have been delinquent upon. So double woo-hoo, yay, and let's keep it going. Hopefully everybody is excited as I am. I didn't get to go to their meeting though. Their one meeting in like 3,000 years and I didn't get to go.
And it went till 9:45.
So see how much fun I would have had? I could have extended it by a half an hour. Chapter 18, what I don't understand is the process for how that is going to pop out into the light. So that would be really good to understand.
Thank you. And we didn't have any materials for these items in the
Right.
packet, right? Okay. I imagine we will be getting a memo or something at some point, or some information about when the Title 18 will be popping up into the light, as it were. I mean, we had you.
There's no product to share at the moment, so.
Right, so I'm just saying,
yeah.
you verbally just said.
I did.
When, an approximate timeline, and I'm just saying that isn't in the actual materials
It's not.
right now.
Because that causes me to do extra work, like write a memo. So, and I'm not being cranky, but I am a little cranky. If this is a verbal update, that's one thing. If this is a written update with memos, that takes on a different form. And so I'm not pushing back. It's your committee. Tell me what your preference is, and I will try to do that.
Okay, yeah, and I guess I wasn't specifically asking, it was just saying that there will be information about that forthcoming, is more of my
Absolutely.
point.
As soon as I
Maybe memo is the
feel
wrong
like we
word.
have some edges to it that I know that I can provide something publicly that we can deliver on, I will definitely do that. And if there are even flow charts or other things that can help understand the process we're going through, I will definitely share those as soon as we can put them together.
Yeah, that's all I
Okay.
meant. I wasn't
Okay.
requesting a memo on this at this time, just that there would be more information at a later date. Okay. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Then the next meeting of the council,
Me too.
okay, the next meeting of the Council Land and Shore Committee is currently scheduled for May 2nd, 2019, here in council chambers, and with that, we are adjourned.